Hello, my wonderful AP Euro students. So if you haven't yet, I would like you to start off today by going to Socrative.com. Weaver 8556 is the passcode. Please last name, comma, first name as always. That'll count as your attendance. And then hopefully, well, obviously, if you're hearing this, you're watching this video, and we're going to walk through some alternatives to absolutism. So the past couple classes, we've talked about absolutist leaders, what that means, where they get the power from, how they took control of their countries, and then a little bit, we talked about some enlightened rulers, like Frederick the Great and Joseph II of Austria, who worked to improve their countries and had absolute rule themselves for the most part, but used it to be enlightened or give their people more rights. And we're going to talk about more about the Enlightenment era coming up. So today we're going to talk about some of the alternatives to absolutism, and then you're going to spend the rest of the class after Socrative in this video, and please submit the English Bill of Rights assignment. So today's lecture is going to be kind of short, and of course, make sure you submit the notes. So again, some alternatives to absolutism. We talked about Spain, Austria, Prussia, Russia, France, and how they've started to be centralized and eventually absolutist leaders. But we're going to look at some countries in Europe that went the opposite way. So we're going to focus on England. And if you remember talking about the English Civil War a little bit, this is going to be a little bit of a recap of that. So England is always going to seem to resist absolutism more than a lot of other countries. Like France is going to be the polar, like the exact definition of absolutism under Louis XIV, where he has complete control. Remember, the Sun King, everything revolves around him. England is going to be the polar opposite that does everything they can to fight off absolutism. So as opposed to the rest of Europe, England and the Dutch Republic, which are the Netherlands, remember they gained their independence after the 30 Years' War. They broke away from Spain after the 80-year revolt. Further the power of representative assemblies, which is just parliament or a group of people coming together making decisions instead of kings. Our parliament here is called, in the United States, is Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. So the gentry in England, and if you remember that term gentry, those were the people that didn't grow up with traditional noble privileges, but because of the age of exploration, joint stock companies, and mercantilism, were able to become very, very wealthy themselves, and therefore they wanted political power to go with that wealth. So they become very powerful since the English Civil War when they rise up and overthrow the king. So they made sure to put several limits on the monarch's power. So one thing they're going to do in order to control the monarch in England is they required Parliament's permission in order for the king to take new taxes. Remember, absolutist leaders depend on taxes because you need taxes in order to pay an army, and you need an army to be able to enforce your decision. So no taxes without Parliament's approval means you can't raise your army without their approval either. Fair trial for all crimes. So they basically wanted to outlaw the Star Chamber that was opened by, King Louis the Seventh. I'm sorry, not King Louis, King Henry the Seventh, the Tudor dynasty. Now, if we remember talking about the Star Chamber earlier on in the year, and James the Second, like those before him, wanted to rule as a near absolute monarchy. So remember, it went and he also happened to be Catholic and was very clear in his actions that he intended to give Catholics more power and privilege. And remember, ever since the Act of Supremacy, England was anti-Catholic. Even though some of their traditions were still kind of Catholic under the Act of Supremacy, they are not Catholic. They don't want to be Catholic. They absolutely hated Catholic the same way most people in France hated Protestants. So if you remember the orders of the English monarchs, the first one we talked about was Henry VII. He was the one with the Stars Chamber that started to centralize. Then you had Henry VIII. He was the one with the Act of Supremacy and many wives. When he died, his son Edward took over and turned the country a little bit Protestant, but he didn't rule for very long. Mary I took over, which was Bloody Mary, known for turning the country back Catholic and killing a lot of Protestants. Elizabeth I took back over, had another act of supremacy, the same way her father did, and then she is going to eventually die with no heirs, and that's when James I starts the Stuart dynasty, because it was passed down through bloodlines. He ruled as an absolute monarch. He's the one that disbanded Parliament when they didn't listen, and then his son Charles I takes over, and he was the one that was beheaded during the English Civil War. So as we keep going, James II, after the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell rules for a little while, and then it moves on to Charles II. Charles II kind of takes England back to what it was before the Civil War, a king that had a lot of power. When he passes away, James II takes over, and they don't like him because he's like secretly Catholic and tries to give them more power, and they did not like being ruled by a Catholic. So this brings us to the Glorious Revolution that we touched on briefly earlier in the year. So when James II began dismissing judges and military officials and replaced them with Catholics, the largely Anglican and Puritan Parliament became concerned. So basically, Parliament feared a Catholic takeover was lining up, and in order to fix the situation and get rid of James, Parliament invited Dutch William of Orange, he was one of the leaders of the Netherlands, to invade England and take the throne. They promised to send their forces, their supplies, their troops to aid William to take over, only if William agreed to their rights to limit his power and increase theirs. Of course, William of Orange is going to accept to become the King of England. So William agreed to these terms, and when he arrived with his army, most of James II's army just defected and said, "No, we're not fighting," fearing for his head, as Charles I did, years earlier. James fled to France, where his big cousin Louis XIV protected him and gave him a castle, so he went and lived there, lucky him. So the Glorious Revolution is going to be mostly bloodless, and it's going to have, a Dutch ruler come and take over England as well. The reason they chose him was because James II's daughter married him, so they saw him as next in line, and because he was Protestant, they liked him. So only two things, the two things that concerned the gentry the most were liberty and property, the right of the individual, so liberty just means freedom, and their money, businesses, and land property should be protected against the government from just taking it because they want to take it or because they say so. Furthermore, they said these rights should not be alienated without consent or permission of the governed. So basically, people that are governed have a say. Example, no new laws without approval by Parliament, and no taking property without a fair trial. With these in mind, Parliament made reforms designed to make sure the king and government could not violate these rights without due process of the law. So here are some of the reforms they're going to make in 1689 with the Glorious Revolution. Parliamentary sovereignty, an English Bill of Rights. So parliamentary sovereignty is just a fancy way of saying that they are an equal part of the government and they can make or reject their own laws. The king doesn't get to just dismiss them whenever they want, like earlier in the 1600s in England. And the English Bill of Rights is similar to our Bill of Rights we have in the United States. Actually, the United States is going to base their Bill of Rights off England's Bill of Rights. Guaranteed freedom of speech for Parliament members. You couldn't get locked up for saying something bad about the king. But remember, in places like France, if you wrote something bad about King Louis XIV, you could very well be thrown in jail or even killed for it. It eliminated cruel and unusual punishment and required trial by jury. So you'll notice a lot of these are built into our American culture today. It limited the monarch's power and established free elections for Parliament. So England is going to have the first constitutional government by creating a limited constitutional monarchy and a protection of people's rights. So England is going to be the first country in England to really reject absolutism. And if someone wanted to be in charge, if they wanted to be king, they needed to have consent of the governed and they needed to work with other people. So even though they were still king and yes, they had power, they're not going to be absolutist rulers in England like they're going to be in France and some of the other places that we've talked about. I know some of you are probably a bit confused with the rulers of England, and I went over them earlier, but it wouldn't hurt like if I'm just going to take one second, and if I'm going to pull it up so it's in front. I believe that I gave you a list of all the different rulers already, especially in the I Want to Do Well folder. But if we'll just go to Wikipedia and see what comes up. A list of rulers. None of these are important. None of these are important. It really doesn't get important. No, Wikipedia, you're not getting my money. It really starts important with the, almost there, House of Tudor. So we've talked about Henry VII, Star Chamber, started to centralize. Henry VIII, active supremacy, centralized even more, created the Anglican Church. His son, who turned the country Protestant, really didn't do very much. Don't worry about Lady Jane. Basically, she was in charge for 9 days. She's never really accepted as the queen. You really don't need to know her. She was overthrown and killed because they saw Mary as the true heir to the throne. Bloody Mary turns the country Catholic, highly unpopular, kills a lot of Protestants. Philip, just because they married, that's Philip II of Spain, if you remember him. Elizabeth the First. So the only reason he's there is because they married for a short time. Elizabeth I takes over. She returns England into the active supremacy, Anglican. When she dies with no heir, and you can see that like his claim to it, James I takes over and starts the Stuart dynasty. The reason is he's the great grandson of Henry VII, and because Elizabeth died with no heirs because she was never married, it passed down to him. Then it goes, he ruled as an absolute monarch and disbanded parliament and really didn't get along with parliament. Charles the First wanted to rule like his dad did. He's going to be the one that gets executed during the English Civil War, where it's, he had the Cavaliers on his side fighting the Roundheads of Oliver Cromwell. So he's the one that's going to die in the English Civil War. For a short time, Oliver Cromwell and then Richard Cromwell are going to take over and rule as like military dictators. But eventually, England's going to want it to go back to how it was. And this is called the restoration of the monarchy. They invite the son of Charles I, who they killed. Imagine going back and taking over the leadership of a country after they killed your father. Anyways, Charles II does. He tries to rule as an absolute leader. James II, again, takes over for him, again, tries to rule as an absolute leader. But because he's Catholic, he's very unpopular. And so they invite his daughter, Mary, and her husband, William of Orange, who is the two people we just talked about in the Glorious Revolution, to come take over as long as they agree to that English Bill of Rights. So I know this was really quick, but it's important in England. Remember, like I tell you, all monarchs aren't important. It is important to know the ones that we've talked about in England from the start of the Tudor dynasty to where we're at right now with William of Orange. It really becomes unimportant after that because kings don't have that much power, or queens, because of that English Bill of Rights. So now that you're done with this, please go to the English Bill of Rights assignment and complete that. If you have any questions, let me know. And let me know if you have any questions. Goodbye.